Live everywhere on netrootsradio.com. David Waldman, Kagro, in the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It's Friday, October 27th, 2023. Time for another show, and it's a Friday show, so we can, I guess you can put anything in a Friday show, but, well, you know, we tend to put certain anythings in a Friday show, and this one will be no different in that it is also a Friday show. I don't know whether the content will be any different. I'm not sure. I don't know whether I need to read you the rest of the Constitution and what Mike Johnson thinks about it, something like that. But I think we've drilled down pretty good on that subject, but apparently everybody else now doing the right things, looking back on Mike Johnson's history and writings and recordings, etc., and finding all the other various things wrong with him. Not that any of them were going to dissuade Republicans from electing him as they did, and they'll forgive anything that you discover along the way now, but, you know, it'll be fodder for everyone else and inspiration for Democrats to turn themselves and their friends and neighbors out for the election. So, you know, we'll take it for what it's worth. There's no reason why we shouldn't delve into these things and find out what's going on and learn more about him. But I mean, I think we made the point adequately yesterday, even though we didn't get through all the way through the Isaac Chodner interview with him. I did look through the rest of it. There's nothing else, you know, hugely revelatory in it. He is who he appears to be, and that's that. But yeah, I was just particularly struck by the smoothness between this and the podcasts that he did on it. The smoothness with which he leaps from one framing to another on the same question and just sort of says it in a soothing voice such that you don't notice these massive substitutions. You know, for him to sit there and say he's a textualist on the Constitution and then tell you this is one of the most clearly written phrases in the Constitution, and then, you know, and it's only a couple of words, and then he explains it to you, and the words that he uses to explain it don't appear anywhere in that phrase, and there's not a lot of words. And in order for his thing to work, for instance, you know, you heard it yesterday, in order for his framing to work, you have to imagine that the word manner actually says rules, and that the word appoint, state shall appoint, is actually means state legislature and elect. And no, none of those words are actually in there. And but he just says it, and says, but then he says, common sense, right? Common sense. Well, not common sense. In order, you know, I ordered French toast, and this is, you know, fried chicken. But if you imagined that it was French toast, then you would be happy. And everybody knows common sense, right? That's French toast. It's not. Go away. So, anyway, lots more to explore with him. Apparently, the gunman in Maine is still, I don't know what. I don't know whether you would say, is he still on the loose? They don't have him. He's not in custody, so I guess he's on the loose. So who knows where he is, what's happening, whether he's curled up and, you know, dead in a cave somewhere. I don't know. But the latest was that they found his car down by a boat launch, and that he has a boat. And so I don't know whether he's like ranging through Maine or who knows where on rivers, or whether he's, you know, on an island somewhere and in the middle of a river and just it's uninhabited and he's hiding there. I don't know, but it's nerve-wracking. Everybody's locked down again, I think, in Maine. I don't know whether people who are further off of the river are feeling more adventurous about going back to work, but shades of the Washington sniper years ago to me. I mean, having lived through that, I guess, and knowing that there was a gunman on the loose and he could pop up anywhere. Well, I don't mean to make people in Maine nervous, but I guess it's too late. But Well, yeah. And also, of course, he's got all sorts of social media presence that would indicate that he has been exposed to a diet of right-wing media for years. But I guess local police have declared that he's not, whatever this means, connected in any way to domestic terrorist organizations, which I guess means he's been reading all their propaganda, but they haven't been sending him checks. Is that what it means to not be connected to right-wing domestic terrorism now? Not really sure whether that passes. All right, we have lots of other things to catch up on. I guess I also should mention, now I have to go and grab an article, but I didn't put any aside, but it is news. The Charlottesville statue of Robert E. Lee, which was the center of the controversy that led to the organization and launch of the Unite the Right rally, where they showed up in their stupid uniforms and then murdered people nearby, and then had their picture taken with tiki torches screaming, "You will not replace us." That comes up again, too, because somebody has determined that Mike Johnson has dabbled in the great replacement theory, along with other crazy theories that he's espoused. But anyway, the statue was going to be removed, and that's what I guess drew in the forces of the right to protect it, because it's important statues be protected because they have very delicate feelings. Anyway, the statue was removed anyway, and the news from yesterday is that it was, and there's video available, the statue was actually melted down with plans to use the materials for some other piece of public art in the future. Presumably not a, statue of Proud Boys or Groypers or anything like that, unless they win, in which case, of course, naturally we'll have statues of them in every public square, but we'll try and prevent that. And so that has been of some interest and generated a lot of talk. I just thought, in case you had ever followed at all the situation with the statue, which very quickly was surpassed as the centerpiece of the rally, it's been melted down, and it's kind of exciting and symbolic in that sense. All right, let's see. Oh, look at this. Justice tells me that Mike has a Nestor problem, apparently, as well. That's interesting, and sends me the Talking Points memo piece on it. I'd love to take a look at it, because all I had heard was that I guess that he's got 2 kids. And I don't know whether they're both adopted or one is adopted and one is not, or whether they're not. I don't know. I don't really know what the situation. Maybe they're not either adopted. But one of his sons is black, and I assume that since I've seen his wife and she doesn't appear to be black, I guess that maybe this is an adopted son. Maybe both are adopted, and I don't know. But at any rate, that's weird, because I thought, well, okay, that's a nice thing to do. It's a good thing to know about somebody who doesn't have a lot of good things going for them. But now, I guess there's some interest in it and more. I guess there must be something, because honestly, for TPM and Josh Marshall, who wrote this piece, to be running with the headline, "What's up with Speaker Mike Johnson's black son?" Probably, knowing Josh Marshall, it's not, "Hey, why did he adopt a black kid? That's crazy because white supremacy, and we love it too, just like he does." And how what is up? So now I'm curious about, why would you ask a question like that? What's up with him? He is who he is. What's the issue? Let's find out. I'm willing to divert the show, because the rest of the show is nuts. Let's see. On Speaker Johnson's first full day in office, half the journalism world was looking into the surprise speaker's past. In his meteoric one-day rise from 4-term representative to speaker, there was no time for anyone to vet him. That's, semi-true. Others they've vetted him, but the mainstream papers haven't put those vettings on their front page. They were written years ago when he was rising to prominence. I did see Dave Weigel musing along with others, including Sarah Posner, who's been writing about him for a long time, like, the head of a Republican study committee is not a obscure figure, but it is really. And even in Washington, among the scandal sheets, they don't tend to pay a great deal of attention to that. Dave Weigel does. That's good. Sarah Posner did. That's fantastic. We spent a little time reading their profiles, which is us catching up. But anyway, right. What was distracting me? Oh, yes, right. The use of the phrase meteoric rise. When we all know meteors fall. And that really bothers me. What's meteoric? How could it be a meteoric rise? Meteors fall. It should be a meteoric fall, really. But I don't know. I guess because they streak across the sky and get a lot of attention. It's one of our worst metaphors, I think. Get this one out of the English language. Okay. Well, doesn't matter because one part of that past came out of left field. Videos surfaced of an interview Johnson did with Walter Isaacson just after the death of George Floyd in June 2020, in which he revealed that he had, and here's the answer, adopted black son, Michael. He gave him his name. Although I think I heard somebody say that maybe Mike Johnson's full name is, something Michael Johnson, and he just goes by Mike as a middle name that he chose. I don't know what the first name is. Usually something wacky and crazy. But anyway, I did hear about this, and I did hear the comment that he made. And what was most interesting about it was this was another one of those situations where a otherwise heartless Republican somehow finds his way to recognizing some salience in what was normally a liberal talking point. And the answer as to, well, why did that happen? How did that come to be? Is it happened to that Republican. Okay, so George Floyd, among Republicans whose families are all white, he was a criminal and a drug addict anyway, and it's his own fault, and he shouldn't have been something, whatever it is he's accused of doing, even if it was nothing. But if you have an adopted black son, then you actually have some concern about that. I guess, related story that, who was it? Jared Golden, from Maine, the Democratic representative one of the two Democratic representatives from Maine, who's been how shall we put it? He's been a supporter of gun rights. He's been getting like A ratings, by the way, all along from the NRA. Up in Maine and Vermont, there's a contingent of, gun owners there where guns have kind of never really been regulated because they've never really run into huge problems about it. But now, of course, now that they're all over the place and irresponsible people are carrying their guns all over the place and then murderers are carrying their guns all over the place, now they have a problem. And so now he has said, oh yeah, that's actually an issue and maybe I should have paid attention to it and I've changed my mind about it. And, good. I'm glad he's come around on it. That's a good thing. It's a little annoying and embarrassing that it takes a shooting in your district to do that when it's like, the prize value of Democrats versus Republicans. If you're still looking for a difference, what's wrong with you? But anyway, it's empathy. Like the ability to be able to see a problem and say, that could happen to us. We should do something about it. Whereas Republicans see a problem and say, I can't believe those idiots have that problem. F them. Or maybe even, is there any way for us to twist this knife in the backs of people who are having this problem such that their wallets fall out and we can keep it? But then they get stabbed and they're like, oh, we got to do something about these knives. So anyway, Jared Golden has had his moment on that. I'm glad he's changed his mind. Keep in mind, this is a rambling show. We're all over the place today, but that's Friday for you. Keep in mind, Steve Scalise, if you're like, Jared Golden, screw that guy. He has to wait until, Steve Scalise got shot in a mass shooting and he's still walking with a limp. He was very seriously injured in a mass shooting, and he still didn't change his mind. Actually got shot and never changed his mind. But I was thinking a little bit about that. I don't know what kind of memory you have of that shooting, but the shooter in that case had like a World War II era Soviet rifle, granted a semi-automatic rifle, but a very early style semi-automatic rifle, not AK-47 level machine gun rapid fire, but, it's a semi-automatic rifle. But it's old school, wooden stock, the whole bit. And, it's nothing compared to an AR-15. But as it turns out, Steve Scalise was shot in the hip, and, it, broke his pelvis and damaged his lower internal organs, et cetera, et cetera. Bad wound. But if he had been shot with an AR-15 and the muzzle velocity that carries and the way the bullets tear you apart, I don't think he would have survived that. It was close call for him as it was, but shot in the hip and into the lower abdomen, you would have been dead with an AR-15. Not to mention the fact that you probably would have had multiple hits, but, at a minimum, I don't think he would have kept his leg, and he might have lost both legs in a wound like that. He really would have been torn in half. And we don't talk about that. And he doesn't talk about that because, of course, that would, force him to admit that there's a huge gun problem in this country and in particular problems with the AR-15. But in the meantime, for one thing, he's walking around and using his second chance at life to F up everybody else's life, for one thing. And for another, he's like, well, I got shot, but I don't know what everybody's crying about. What's the big deal? I got shot and I'm fine. I almost became Speaker of the House. Everybody should get shot. You wouldn't have made it. You wouldn't have made it. That would have been the end of it right there at the baseball practice. Anyway, just wanted to, make mention of some of those things that are on my mind in case we don't get around to them today because there's so much more. But, let's see. What did I have open? What were we in the middle of reading? I can't even remember now what we decided to open up. Oh, yes, right. Johnson's son. There we are. Okay, so Johnson went on to explain that there was no question that his black 14-year-old son Michael faced challenges that his white 14-year-old Will never would. That's confusing because the kid's name is Will, and he won't. You see? But anyway, okay, yeah, right? Good point. Normal person point. But he's a conservative Republican, so how could he have come to this conclusion? Many on the leftward side of the political spectrum were struck by Johnson's empathy and frank recognition of discrimination in contemporary America, while right-wingers denounced him for his wokeness. It's true, there's some links here. I saw some last night, the usual suspects, but they were all tweeting like Mike Johnson has gone woke. He's a traitor because he recognizes that black kids might face different or greater challenges than some white kids. Well, anyway, I had only heard this story in passing until this evening, says Josh, when TPM reader RS flagged something odd about the story. And it is odd, now that you mention it. No African-American son shows up in any of the family photographs on Johnson's house website or on his personal Facebook page. That can't feel real good. Nor does Michael figure anywhere in any of Johnson's campaign biographies. Hey, as I went further down this rabbit hole tonight, I was a bit dumbfounded. Is Michael made up? Oh my God. Wow, that would really be something. Now I see the Nestor problem and all this. Is he excluded from family pictures? You could be open to the possibility that the kid might be like, I don't want to be in the family pictures for various reasons. But all right, if he offers that excuse, I don't know how much you can do. Although the kid will be older than 14 now, maybe when he's 18, he'll speak about what was going on. But anyway, I was so baffled, Josh says, that I went pretty far down that rabbit hole trying to figure out what was going on. Ooh, exciting. A bit more poking around revealed that Michael also came up a year earlier in a House hearing on reparations in 2019. Johnson opposed reparations and noted that his black son Michael did too. Oh, well, of course, Michael would have been, George Floyd 2020 14-year-old son. So 2019, he'd be a 13-year-old. So there you go. You can't have reparations because my 13-year-old says so. Well, in response to jeering from spectators at the hearing Johnson departed from his prepared remarks to invoke Michael. Well, let me finish. Listen, wait a minute. Many of my colleagues in this committee may not be aware. In addition to our 4 children at home, my wife and I have a much older son. Oh, who happens to be African American. What do you mean much older? We took custody of Michael and made him part of our family 22 years ago when we were just 22 years ago, when we were just newlyweds and Michael just 14 and out on the streets on a dangerous path. So they adopted him 22 years ago when he was 14 and he never aged and he's still 14. But his opinion on reparations is actually much more relevant because he's in his late 20s now, or late 30s. But what are we talking about here? This is a little bit odd, isn't it? A bit later in his remarks, Johnson said, I asked Michael this weekend what he thinks about the idea of reparations. In a very thoughtful way, he explained his opposition. We're not offered that thoughtful way. We're just told that it exists. Now, I was able to piece the story together from the introduction to the full video of the 2020 interview and a write-up in The Advocate centered on the 2019 reparations hearing. In Johnson's interview with Walter Isaacson, again, anyway, it sounds like he's talking about two 14-year-olds, boys of the same age. But if you listen closely, he refers to Michael at that age in the past tense. Michael was 36 in June of 2019 and presumably is 40 today. Johnson is 51. Okay, I mean, this isn't clear in the clip that's been circulating, or at least it wasn't to me, but Johnson wasn't being misleading because the chronology is explained earlier in the interview. All right, that is interesting. And here's a screen cap from that he uses as a photo here from a 2020 PBS interview with Walter Isaacson. And you can see Mike Johnson's extremely young in this photo. So is his wife. And here's Michael. If they're 11 years older than him and he's 14, then they're 25. And they've adopted I guess that can work. I mean, look, instant family situation. You don't have to raise them from infants. You can adopt them at any point. And they thought that might be a nice thing to do when they were very young. So, okay. It's just, that doesn't jump immediately to mind. It requires some explaining. Is there more? Well, tell me, Josh. Okay. Well, the chronology is explained earlier in the interview. Johnson said at the hearing that he and his wife took custody of Michael, quote unquote, took custody of Michael around 1997. So the exact relationship with Michael is uncertain, and it's unclear whether the Johnsons ever adopted Michael. It sounds like the relationship may have been more of a fostering relationship and that the Johnsons consider him a son in an informal sense. But again, it's simply not clear. All right, that could work. When the Advocate asked Johnson's spokeswoman, Ainsley Hollyfield, to elaborate on the relationship between Michael and Johnson's family back in 2019, she told the paper, the congressman will not be commenting further than what was said today in committee out of respect for Michael, his privacy, and their relationship. All right. That makes, that's a possibility. What the heck? All right. Well, in case you were very intrigued by what that was all about, and what do you mean? He says he's got a black son, and here's a picture of his family. They're nowhere to be seen. That would be a reason. He's 40 and living on his own, and either maybe was never adopted or anything, and may have a fantastic relationship with the Johnsons and thank them for everything. But no, I won't be coming back from, wherever, California, New York, Montreal, Paris, for this family photo for your campaign brochure. But good luck, and I would vote for you if I were registered in Louisiana. Maybe is, maybe isn't. It could be. We'll see whether we learn any more about that in the days to come. Okay. That can't be the most important thing. The most important thing has to be George Santos, right? All right. I have a report from The Hill. Now everybody's got this news, but The Hill reached me first. New York Republicans move to force a vote on Santos expulsion. And as a matter of fact, I guess the first and most obvious thing that has taken place under the Mike Johnson speakership is all the members have come to realize how many privileged resolutions there are out there that they could be making that will get instant attention and throw the House into chaos. So apparently, like, once he was elected, the New York Republican contingent said, well, we'll move to expel Santos, which is a remarkable thing to do. You know, they still, like, they've got their speaker in place now. So Greg was saying, well, they don't need him as much, but they still need him. I mean, they have a razor thin margin, but they're just embarrassed by him. So they want him expelled. That, of course, requires a 2/3 vote. It does require working with Democrats. Look out. Oh, where's my dramatic music? There we go. But I guess they're willing to do that and to see him gone. So, okay, there's that one. And then Marjorie Traitor Greene has filed a motion, a privileged motion to censure Rashida Tlaib, right? Is that right? For her comments following the development of the war in Gaza. Which, no doubt, I mean, she's Palestinian American. No doubt, it doesn't matter. Anybody who's looking for anti-Semitism in it can make up. I don't know what she said. I don't know, but I imagine it's not too difficult to imagine what people would find in there and point to and say, anti-Semitism. The problem, of course, is that this is being filed by Jewish space lasers lady, who is herself highly questionable in the issue of anti-Semitism. But she's looking to see if she can leverage Republican hatred of all Democrats, and Rashida Tlaib in particular, and then maybe peel off some number of either Jewish Democrats or people who have large Jewish contingents in their constituencies looking to make a mark. I don't think it's going to reach 2/3, though.
Hi, I'm Scott Anderson, the guy that writes the daily summary for this show, Kagro in the Morning. Thank you to everyone that supports this show. Many of you send donations through PayPal, Patreon, Square Cash, Radio Public, and so on. Some of you write your own essays and send them in, or read articles with your own commentary. We appreciate it. Now, some of you are listening to this and thinking, I'd like to help, but isn't there something I could do that wouldn't require money or effort? Why, yes, there is. You can just like us. On Daily Kos, they call it the recommend button. YouTube has a thumbs up. There are hearts and likes and love buttons. Tap our love button. Tap our love button every day. Share our shows and summaries on Facebook and Twitter, YouTube and iTunes, Stitcher and Amazon. Most of these places allow you to write a review, so a sentence or two would be great. Recommend us to social media, or tell your friends to listen to the show. You aren't just helping us, you're helping them find their new favorite thing to listen to. You could change the world. So thank you in advance from me and everybody else in the world.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Let's see, all right. Oh, justice. He's supposing that perhaps Johnson's black son, Michael, is traveling with Tim Scott's girlfriend, probably in Canada. That could be. Maybe they're both a little bit imaginary. But, all right, well, a plausible explanation has been put forward, even though it's a little odd, to say the least. I mean, I guess if you presented me from the beginning with that timeline, I guess I'd be like, it's a little unusual. I'll grant that, but it's certainly possible. But on the other hand, I'm a little bit worried about Johnson because he's that kind of guy that's, people have often said that, Donald Trump is extremely dangerous, but what you really got to look out for is the Donald Trump mind that somehow has enough polish that you're not distracted by his insanity and impetuousness and childlike tantrums all the time. And they've pointed to Ron DeSantis as that guy, except Ron DeSantis is a dysfunctional robot. And Mike Johnson may be that guy, although he's not running for president. But now, of course, he's on the stage and is Speaker of the House. There's all sorts of things he could do. And I guess, I don't know, it's when the last time somebody who was Speaker of the House had a real shot at using it as a springboard to the presidency. I mean, Newt Gingrich was Speaker and then ran for president briefly, but he was never a serious contender. So what are we talking about? Like Henry Clay era that people the last time? Anyway, mostly by the time people become Speaker, they're institutionalists, and that's the end of it, and they're just going to live and die there. Or they get convicted of molesting their wrestlers. You know, various things can happen to you, but the presidency is not usually one of them. But, all right, we'll see whether that develops any further. Right, so, oh yes, right, George Santos, they have a resolution calling for his expulsion. Oh, and I was saying about Marjorie Traitor Greene has a censure resolution against Tlaib. And I said, oh, well, I don't think they're going to get anywhere near 2/3. But they don't need 2/3 to impose censure. It's 2/3 to expel you from the House, which is what they want to do with Santos. And no doubt Marjorie Traitor Greene wants to expel Rashida Tlaib from the House, but there's no way they're going to get to 2/3 on that. But could they get a majority? They'll probably unite all Republicans. But interestingly, she's probably thinking I can say it was a bipartisan decision because there will be some Democrats who have, a strong enough interest in demonstrating support for Israel that they might be peeled off and join in this condemnation of what Rashida Tlaib said. But I hope they're organizing against that. And, it would be a shame to lend support to it, especially when Marjorie Traitor Greene and her Republican colleagues were just going crazy the other day and living through a 3-week nightmare trying to select a speaker because they wanted to select people who, like them, would refuse to work with Democrats or accept Democratic votes on anything. And now she's offering this resolution in the hopes of getting some Democratic votes. She won't need them, she won't need them to pass the resolution, but she'll need them for PR purposes. And then that, all of a sudden, you're willing to take Democratic votes, huh? Well, don't give her any. So, okay. New York Republicans moved to force a vote on a Santos expulsion, just so we know who the players are. We'll read quickly through this thing. Representative Anthony D'Esposito, Republican of New York, called the measure to the floor as a privileged resolution Thursday afternoon, which, you now know, forces leadership to act on the legislation within 2 days. The House left Washington Thursday afternoon, yesterday, and is not scheduled to return until, like the rest of you, Wednesday. Is that when you're returning to work, everyone? All right. Leadership can move to table the resolution or refer it to a committee, both of which would require majority support. But if the legislation comes to the floor for a vote, it will need backing from 2/3 of the chamber. The path forward on the expulsion resolution will be one of the first big decisions made by Speaker Mike Johnson, who won the gavel Wednesday following former Speaker Kevin McCarthy's ouster. You know that story. Johnson will have to make a decision on the Santos expulsion in the first week on the job. D'Esposito said he informed Johnson of his plans to bring the privilege resolution to the floor early Thursday, and according to Representative Nick LaLota, I don't know how he says it, but L-A, capital L-A, capital L-O-T-A, according to Nick LaLota, the newly minted speaker said, do what's right and do what's right for New York. All right. The New York Republicans said their decision to force a vote on expelling their colleague at this time was in response to a guilty plea from Santos's former campaign treasurer, Nancy Marks. I think they might be getting ahead of themselves here, but okay. I mean, he's definitely a weirdo and oddball and guilty of something, but usually they wait until he's convicted of something. But all right, what did she get convicted of? Marks pleaded guilty to conspiring with the then candidate to fraudulently inflate his campaign finance reports. All right, that's not good. Marks reached a plea deal with prosecutors earlier this month, pleading guilty to 1 count of conspiracy to defraud the United States. Days later, Santos was charged with 10 new criminal counts on allegations that he went along with it, inflated his campaign finance reports, and charged donors' credit cards without authorization, bringing the total number of charges against him to 23. In May, Santos was indicted on 13 federal charges over accusations that he misled donors and misrepresented his finances to the public and government agencies. Santos is set to be arraigned for the second set of charges today, Friday. Certainly the indictment is persuasive, but more importantly, the plea by his treasurer confirming everything that we knew. Lalata told reporters, "We knew a lot beforehand. He admitted to a lot of things in the D'Esposito resolution, but the treasurer's, he admitted to a lot of things that are in the D'Esposito resolution, but the treasurer's plea is, I think, confirmation of that, of a criminal conspiracy to defraud voters, donors, the FEC, and everybody in between." Reached for comment, Santos referred the Hill to a post on Twitter, it has another name now, that reads, 3 points of clarification. 1, I have not cleared out my office. That doesn't mean anything. 2, I'm not resigning. And 3, I'm entitled to due process and not a predetermined outcome as some are seeking. God bless. The move, it's not predetermined. They have to find out whether they have the votes. The move by the New York Republicans on Thursday is the second effort in recent months to expel Santos from office. Representative Robert Garcia, a Democrat of California, forced a vote on expelling Santos in May, but the House ultimately voted to send the resolution to the Ethics Committee, a move that was panned as largely redundant because the panel was already investigating the congressman. They didn't want to, give in to a Democratic move to expel him, but they will give in to a Republican one if they, maybe, I don't know, they might not do it. The New York Republicans, who have called for Santos to resign and be expelled, voted in favor of referring the resolution in May, deferring to the panel as the legal process played out. D'Esposito said the New Yorkers are hearing that the Ethics Committee is supposed to be wrapping up its report very soon. Now, however, because of the Mark's guilty plea, they say it's time to remove Santos from Congress. I think the difference between this and what the Democrats had brought, because they're losers, is that you have a guilty plea in court by his treasurer, confirming significant details, and obviously a superseding indictment based on that conviction and guilty plea by the treasurer. Representative Mike Lawler, another Republican of New York, told reporters when the original expulsion resolution was referred to ethics, it was because you need a level of due process here, and obviously, in order to get to the 2/3 vote, people need to be able to base it on something. You have that with the guilty plea of his treasurer. It's a thing. His treasurer pled guilty, he added later. The superseding indictment that he's going to court tomorrow for, that's how it's written, is based on the treasurer's guilty plea. So you have now a conviction in this case that very clearly lays out what he did and how he did it. Lalata suggested that New York Republicans would not support a motion to table the resolution, telling reporters, I don't think a motion to table, if there is one, will be successful. We plan on voting on a resolution to expel George Santos, D'Esposito later said. The expulsion resolution, which spans 3 pages, references you got to reference all those lies, right? And misrepresentations that Santos has been accused of making. That should be fun reading. It also lists his federal charges in the Marks case. If Santos is expelled, the House GOP's majority, you know who I'm talking about? GOP. All right, in case you didn't recognize GOP. The House GOP's majority would become even slimmer, which is, no pun intended. I mean, George Santos is a curvy guy. That's the word for it that they use now, right? Curvy. Well, anyway, but their majority would be even slimmer, taking away a key vote for the conference's legislative pushes. If a vacancy opens up, a special election would be held to fill the seat. That would be up to the governor of New York, I guess, to call that special election. I don't know what kind of time frame we're talking about, but I wonder whether if he's expelled before the end of the year, they might be compelled to call a special election and they would be filling the seat for the better part of a year until the November elections came around. But anyway, I mean, it would cause certain complications, but you could leave the seat vacant. I mean, I guess if they didn't expel him until after the first of the year, a lot of states have rules that, well, if it's only from January to November before there's going to be an election, we'll just allow it to remain open. But, New York has the infrastructure, and they might find that it's best. I don't know. I'm not certain how many Democrats. There's probably 1,000 Democrats dying to run for that seat, and everybody's been, wow, you'll be famous. I'm the one running against George Santos, and then they'll all be clamoring for running for the seat now and coming into their first full term if they then stand for election in November, as they were planning to do anyway. If there's a special election in, March or something, and then they come in with extra seniority, it's one of those situations. But, all right, we could be rid of George Santos in short order. I mentioned that Marjorie Traitor Greene is up to something, too. I don't think I put aside an article on that one, but, how much do you need to know? She's targeting Rashida Tlaib, and I'll try and find you I wrote a note to myself. We'll see if I remember my note to find you a link for that. But in all likelihood, it's not one of you that would require proof that was really going on. You know very well Marjorie Traitor Greene would be doing something like this at this point. There's more machinations going on. This one in the Senate, and it's one that we've, I mentioned in passing without going into the details of the mechanics of how you would do it. But Democrats in the Senate apparently set now to move against Tommy Tuberville and his military holds. This option was always available to them. I've told you that they do very frequently, both with regular executive branch appointments and with military promotions. They very frequently move these things en bloc. If they have 200 promotions to do, they'll move to consider them as, in one motion, and consider them en bloc and list all of the promotions in the, in announcing it and then ask, but usually they're asking unanimous consent to do that. I ask unanimous consent that the following nominations be considered en bloc, and they'll, be handed a list by the staff, and sometimes it's the senator making the motion who has to sit there and read all of them. I don't know if I've seen it live on C-SPAN and paid close attention, and it might be that they just have to list all the names and to what ranks they're being promoted, or sometimes if they're scheduled for action already on the executive calendar of the Senate, they can just reference them all by number and say, executive calendar numbers, and I forget how they number the things. For some reason, like PN comes to mind. But at any rate, they have a code, and they can just read the numbers or a range of numbers and say, we're going to be considering all of those things. And people who know how to do this stuff can look up on the calendar which nominations are they, but usually it's all, arranged ahead of a time because they're doing unanimous consent. But Tuberville and maybe somebody else would have objected to that kind of unanimous consent request. So, is there another mechanism by which you can throw together hundreds of nominations into one block? Yes, there is. And here it comes. Now you'll learn something new about procedure. Democrats eye rare procedural move to defeat Tuberville military holds. Alexander Bolton writes for The Hill, and The Hill very successfully emails to me. Now, they've also found an interesting movement for this procedure. Senate Democrats are working with, I don't know how I feel about giving her the credit for this, but maybe they think it's strategic in some way. Kyrsten Sinema, who is now, of course, an independent from Arizona, because, in Arizona, that's supposed to mean something. I guess it's magical, or at least to Kyrsten Sinema it is. Well, so they're working with Kyrsten Sinema and a handful of Republicans on a relatively rarely used procedural tactic to defeat Senator Tommy Tuberville's blockade of more than 360 now military promotions, a stalemate that has consumed the Senate for months. Democrats are looking at using a standing order resolution to move a block of more than 300 non-political military nominees who've been stalled for months because of Tuberville's holds to protest the Department of Defense's abortion policies. Now, he's holding all the promotions. This is some subset of the officers being promoted here, but when they say non-political military nominees, that means not the chief of, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, or any of the chiefs of staff, or the highest ranking Pentagon-based type officials, but, people being promoted from captain to major in the Army, and generally speaking, non-political. So like I said, you used to be able to do them in block all the time, but by unanimous consent. If you can't get unanimous consent, this is where the standing order idea comes in. In this case, the resolution would basically allow what you're usually asking for unanimous consent for. I move that we take up a resolution that would establish as a standing order of the Senate, usually with a termination date on it, or usually they say for the balance of the 118th, what are we in, 118th, 119th Congress, or something like that. They put a limitation on it that it's this Congress. During this Congress, we will authorize the en bloc consideration of military promotions in general, or these specific ones, or at any time during this Congress we are hereby authorized by the Senate to move these nominations en bloc. Ordinarily, right, like we said, something done by unanimous consent. If you can't get it, you can simply ask for a majority vote ahead of time. But, it takes some doing in a closely divided Senate to put that together. This is an end run around Tuberville's blockade. But if you have that handful of Republican votes that'll, help make sure you can make it happen, then it'll work. So the resolution would allow the Senate to move military promotions in a group through the end of 2024. That's the termination date they're putting on it, providing exceptions for officers nominated to a position on the Joint Chiefs of Staff or to lead a combatant command. Those, I guess, are too political for this. Sources familiar with internal deliberations said the standing order resolution would likely get introduced next week unless Tuberville drops his holds. It will move first through the Senate Rules Committee. It's not a rules change. It's a standing order resolution because no one wants to fool around with the rules, explained a Democratic senator who requested anonymity to discuss the sensitive topic. So it's not a permanent rule, a standing rule of the Senate. It's a standing order of how the rules will be interpreted for the rest of 2024. It's a little bit like a tactical nuclear option in the sense, right? All you need is a majority, and all you need is a majority to agree that for the balance of 2024 anyway, this is how the Senate will interpret its rules as allowing the en bloc consideration of non-political military promotions, probably without debate, non-debatable, that you can make this motion, and so long as the motion carries, the Senate will bless it as having been done under regular order. The senator emphasized the resolution would be limited to military nominations, not just every kind of nomination, so that, for instance, Rand Paul's blockade of State Department nominations would not be covered by this. You could move the similar thing, but you'd have to get presumably some, you'd have to get unanimity among the Democrats, and presumably they would want some support from Republicans in that, but they wouldn't need it, technically speaking, which is why it's a mystery that they haven't moved this sooner. Sinema came up with the idea and started working with colleagues in both parties on it in early September. It would need strong bipartisan support. Oh, yes, right. And at least 60 votes to overcome an unexpected filibuster, right? It is a debatable motion, so you can filibuster the motion. But, while it looked like there would have been 60 votes to defeat a filibuster on any one of the single promotions, You didn't want to have to invoke cloture on 360 of them and take forever to get through them one by one. But a motion to consider them en bloc could be subject to filibuster, but if you could defeat it, then you could move forward. But similarly, if you do that and you do it with a standing order that's in place between now and the end of 2024, you don't have to overcome the filibuster again if there are more promotions that come down the pike that are non-political that would qualify. You don't have to go through this process all over again. It does make good sense to have a standing order in place. I doubt very much that Kyrsten Sinema said, this is the mechanism. But she probably was saying, well, can't we do something? And somebody figured out what that something was, and probably inside of the Democratic caucus, and probably months ago. And they were probably also thinking, maybe it's strategically we ought to give this to Kyrsten on this. Because it's not entirely clear that she'll be replaced by a Democrat, if she's, when she runs for re-election. I don't know. Maybe we need to bolster her just in case. We'll see. I'm not certain that actually happened. But, all right. Well, it would need a strong bipartisan support and at least 60 votes to overcome the expected filibuster. But on the military promotions, there's pretty good indication that there's some Republicans fed up with Tuberville. All right, so Democrats, of course, now control 51 seats, Republicans 49. Senator Tim Kaine, a member of the Senate Armed Services Committee, said there's already been a good bit of outreach to Republicans on the proposal. The resolution is already getting strong pushback, though, from conservatives within the Senate GOP conference, and Democrats face a tough challenge in rounding up the 9 Republican votes needed to pass it. The Senate Republican whip, John Thune, said it will probably be a heavy lift to find 9 or 10 Republicans needed to roll Tuberville. There's a lot of discussion out there around it, and we'll see where it lands. No Republican senator has yet expressed public support for the resolution. Oh, and that might be the strategic thing. Like, we're putting the independent out there. It's not a Democratic, resolution. It's an independent, so you can sign on without looking like you're working with Democrats. Maybe that's the idea. No Republican senator has yet expressed public support. Those viewed as most likely to vote yes say they would prefer to resolve the impasse in another way. There just isn't one. One conservative senator warned that there will be an intense political backlash against any GOP senator that votes with Democrats to circumvent Tuberville's protest of the Pentagon's policy of paying the travel expenses of service members who take leave to obtain abortions. I think that would be a hard vote for senators to take. I don't know how you can seriously talk about the prerogatives of an institution and defending the rules if you're willing to go out and kneecap one of your own senators who's objecting to unanimous consent, which we do all the time, said the lawmaker. Well, if you're pro-military, you can find a way. It's one thing that almost all Republican voters agree on. High-propensity GOP voters are pro-life, the senator said. It's going to get reported that they're not supporting Tuberville's pro-life issue among the people whose job it is to go out in the world and kill everybody. But okay, whatever. Whom they support wholeheartedly in their death dealing. Senator Marco Rubio said the military promotions being held up by Tuberville should come to the floor individually for votes, not en bloc, which would effectively limit the power of senators to raise objections against specific nominees. But, Marco Rubio knows nothing about the various Army lieutenants scheduled to be promoted to captain. He's got no idea who they are, and he's got no interest in who they are, and no interest in spending time voting on them one by one either. But, just doesn't want to lose a point of leverage. Anyway, an effort to get around Tuberville's hold? No, I think we should vote on them individually for years on end. I'm not in favor of every one of those nominees, but there are some that we should move on, and he's open to moving on them individually, Rubio said. The point he's raising with the Pentagon is they're violating current law, Rubio said, citing the long-standing prohibition on spending federal dollars on abortions. But they're not. They're spending it on travel. Hey. Pentagon officials, however, point to an October 2022 memo by the Department of Defense's General Counsel stating that federal law does not prohibit the use of funds to pay expenses such as per diem or travel expenses that are incidental to the abortion. See? Some hair splitting. And Democrats argue moving the nominees individually would eat up valuable floor time and set bad precedent. The Republican leader, Mitch McConnell, was spotted chatting Thursday afternoon in the Ohio clock corridor. Ooh, there is one. I don't think I even knew about that, but, they have cool little cute names for every little nook and cranny in the Capitol. The Ohio clock corridor. Who was he chatting with? No one from Ohio, and no one who, as far as I know, is a clock enthusiast. But with Senate Armed Services Committee Chair Jack Reed of Rhode Island, who is working on the resolution to advance the stalled military promotions en bloc. Reed declined to answer any questions about the procedural tactics. McConnell has said repeatedly that he does not support Tuberville's hold, making the GOP leader a potential candidate to vote for moving the military promotions in one large package. But, McConnell, I support that. Okay, will you vote for it? No. But other members of McConnell's leadership team wouldn't say whether they would support the resolution to circumvent Tuberville's blockade. It depends on what he says. I'd much rather see the DOD change the policy, but we'll see what happens. Senate Republican Policy Committee Chair Joni Ernst said, referring to the Department of Defense's abortion policy. Tom Tillis of North Carolina, another member of McConnell's leadership team, said he hasn't decided whether to vote for the resolution. We are trying to find a path out of the current situation, adding he hasn't looked yet at the resolution set to drop next week. Senate Armed Services Committee ranking member Roger Wicker, Mississippi, distanced himself from the talks about finding a way of getting around Tuberville. I'm not a part of that, he said. Dan Sullivan of Alaska, Republican, who has worked for months to try to broker a compromise between Tuberville and the Department of Defense, or Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin, and Senate Democrats, told The Hill he hopes a standing order resolution won't be needed, and nobody wants to do it, I guess, or at least publicly they don't want to talk about it. So I don't know. It will work if they can get the votes. The question is, can they get the votes and where will they come from? So, it might fall on its face just based on that. Although it would be interesting once again to, now I'm starting to see what's happening here. Because here's Joe Manchin's name. Such a remove, right, would require a simple majority, but Sinema and centrist Joe Manchin stood firm against invoking the nuclear option to move voting legislation in 2022. Right, it says here, the rumor I'm hearing is if this doesn't work, they might try to go nuclear. Who's he talking to? I guess maybe that's Sullivan saying that they might go nuclear, but Sinema and Manchin would oppose it. Yeah, but here's a solution that they could come up with, but can they move it? All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Just a 1 minute break there. Came at an inconvenient time because it was just dawning on me what the move to hand this to Kyrsten Sinema might really mean here. And I skipped down to read Joe Manchin's name, but I guess if we read all the way through the last paragraphs of the story, it might also start, I don't know, maybe it'll help me reformulate the thoughts. But, right, so they talked to Dan Sullivan. He was unhappy about it, though he was trying to broker some kind of compromise between Tuberville and Lloyd Austin, the defense secretary, and Senate Democrats. But so far, no luck. And then he says, they've been warning that they're going to do this for some time. It's not the way that I'm trying to resolve this. To me, I'm still working to continue to get nominations over the goal line and find what I'm calling a universal solution, he said, which doesn't make any particular sense in the face of this proposal. Like a universal solution, Tuberville doesn't want to allow the DOD to pay for these incidental expenses. The DOD says we're gonna. So that's incompatible. He's blockaded everybody. And, so Sullivan is saying, well, like Marco Rubio, well, we could do them one by one. Well, I'm sure he's not opposed to doing them one by one because it's a disaster for the Senate, and the Senate is Democratic led. And he can point to that and say, sure, the House is dysfunctional when it's led by Republicans, but the Senate's no better. We've been doing nothing but military promotions for a year. But that's your fault for not agreeing to do them quicker. I'm looking for a universal solution. Well, here is one. You can take care of all of them all at once, or at least a huge chunk of them all at once, and you can pick and choose which ones if you want to, but you could do 100 at a time. But, no, we're not going to do that. So then he says, the rumor I'm hearing is that if this doesn't work, they might try to go nuclear, he said, warning that Democrats could try to move more than 300 stalled nominees through a ruling of the Senate chair, a highly controversial maneuver known as the nuclear option. Right. Yes, it is. But like I said, the standing order is like a mini nuke thing. And by the way, before they went, quote unquote, went nuclear under Harry Reid in 2013 to get rid of the filibuster on judicial nominees, or to not get rid of the filibuster, but, to change the interpretation of cloture rules, et cetera, et cetera. It was, actually in the Congress before then, they used a similar sort of standing order kind of settlement. They had been experimenting with the use of standing orders to try and clear out some small bits of these various log jams by, I don't remember what it was. It was like they had some strange agreement that if, X number of senators from each side signed a thing, then the cloture could be invoked by simple majority. But they could never get the right number of senators to sign on from both sides. And it wasn't, as many as they needed in order to get to 60, but it was just some number short of it. So essentially they used a standing order to say, all right, if I don't remember what the split was, if you need 8 senators from the Republican side in order to get to cloture, then if you get the signatures of, they pick some number of them, but it wasn't substantially less, 7 or something like that. If you can get 7 to sign on, then you can invoke cloture by simple majority, except you still needed 57 people to agree to simple majority vote. It was kind of stupid, but it was a gradual step toward changing the interpretation of the rules, at least for a defined period of time, thanks to the standing order. I know this is very confusing, but it's worth exploring. And like I said, it's sort of a mini nuclear option to use a standing order. One, it's like a nuclear option with a sunset date on it. And there's no, you can invoke cloture by simple majority for the next year. And then after that, in the next Congress or after the end of this year, it goes back to normal. So you can have temporary nuclear options. So, maybe they were exploring to see whether or not that might be tempting to Manchin and or Sinema. But there's also another way to interpret it, which is that they won't understand that what they're doing is a mini nuclear option. The mechanism is essentially the same. Can we get, if we can get past cloture and get 60 votes on whether or not to consider this procedure of using a standing order, then if we can get that to the floor and then pass it by simple majority, then we'll only need a simple majority to invoke cloture on a motion to bring these nominations to the floor en bloc. And it's distanced enough, and and there's nothing on there that says, yes, I'm changing the rules, nothing that addresses filibusters or cloture rules directly. There's enough removal from and enough steps in the procedure that they were wondering, essentially, will Manchin and Sinema feel comfortable doing this, because it will be difficult to explain in a headline that they're voting for the nuclear option. Would that make them comfortable? But then I thought, this may also be, all right, well, look, we need your support. Manchin, you're still a Democrat. Sinema, you're not now, but you were, or maybe you want your way back in if you should win re-election, et cetera, whatever. But your whole shtick was that you didn't need to change the rules because you were able to talk to the other side and persuade people and really move votes, and you could find a solution. All right, well, in that case, who's going to move our resolution putting a standing order in place? Who are we going to ask to invoke their special relationship with Republicans and the other side of the aisle to get them to vote for things that are difficult, that only they can bring them around to. How about you, Kyrsten Sinema? How about you, Joe Manchin? You two are the ones who claim to have this special power. Do it. And then we can clear up this whole thing. And, you know, people will celebrate you as the people who broke the logjam on the military promotions blockade. So let's see you flex this superpower and get us some results. And if they do, great, fine. We got the resolution through. We got those promotions through. Fine. We're happy to share some credit with Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin. And if not, then we're no worse off in terms of the nominations, which is still bad news, but you can also grumble to the press. So whatever happened to their stupid superpowers that they were supposed to be able to use to persuade Republicans? I guess they never had that power after all. Maybe they should be thinking nuclear option if they want to get anything done around here. Maybe we were right the whole time. So that may be what's behind handing it to Kyrsten Sinema. So sometimes you see that and you're like, what are they thinking? Why would they give her the credit for that? Oh, wait a minute. Sometimes they are pretty sly, although sometimes they're too sly for their own good. All right. That seems like a good political science lesson for a Friday. How about this? How about we take a short break from me reading and I can bring you the latest installment of the life and times of Darwin Darko. Yeah, he was very interested in recording for us. This was a real favor to us. The story of Pras Michel and the latest of his legal foibles. Although I listened to the recording last night, edited it a little bit, just tightened it up a little bit. But I love to clean up everybody's recordings so they sound as professional as possible. So you shouldn't worry. You know, if you're reading something and you stumble a little bit on the reading of something and then you read it again, as I do all the time live on the air, I'll edit that out if it works, right? You know, like if you say, you misread something and you say, oh, what I meant was, let me start that paragraph over again. And then you do, I can cut that part out so it looks like you're perfect. So I'm happy to extend that to you. Anyway, so I listened through it all. And here's what really astonished me was when I saw that story, I was like, oh, we should update the Pras Michel saga. Because it's been a long time since we read it, but the extraordinarily complicated legal, I don't know what, but the legal peril he found himself in, like somehow Pras Michel, like how is he wrapped up in the 1MDB scandal, the Malaysian sovereign wealth fund? And you remember Joe Low, and the guy was, embezzling and stealing money left and right. And he was trying to use the money to lobby the Trump administration to do a number of things, including pardon him or let him off the hook for his embezzling all of this money. I've embezzled all these dollars, but I'm going to give you part of those dollars so that you will drop the charges against me for embezzling it. And I just keep the balance of it. But it's worth a finder's fee. I embezzled $2 billion. I'll give you $1 billion. Then I still get away with, I don't remember what the numbers were. But then you were like, well, but Pras Michel, how is he even involved in this at all? What the hell is going on? And so I saw this story about the latest developments, and I mentioned it, but I couldn't go into it that day. And Darwin said, oh, I'd be interested in that. Give it to me. I'll read it. And then during his reading, he's like, what the hell? What is he involved in here? Did you miss the first time that we did it? I mean, it wasn't like a big story on the show. You miss one day, you could miss the whole thing. But, or maybe you heard it and you forget because it's not a part of your daily life. But yeah, it's, the story is crazy. And it's amazing to hear Darwin reading it and saying, oh my God, what's he doing? So why don't we let him do it here? All right. Like I said, we all need a reminder of what he was involved in, and Darwin will give it to you. So let's have him do it already.
Pras Samuel Michel. But from here on out, I'm just going to call him Pras.
Okay. Me too.
Hi there, David. Hi there, KITM fam. It's your boy Darwin_Darko. Well, not so much anymore because I'm off of Twitter now, but, and I don't remember what my, screen name is for all these other things. So I am coming to you today as the senior Haitian correspondent. Pras, he's part of the Haitian community. So I thought I'd, give David a coffee break and read this article here from Politico entitled Praz Michel of Fugees seeks new trial, contends former attorney used AI for closing argument. Fugees, y'all remember them? It's a hip hop group from the 90s. Wyclef was in the Fugees, and Lauryn Hill. So you might remember one of their songs. Just look them up, and you'll be able to remind yourself. So Fuji star Praz Michel, who was convicted in April on charges of conspiring to make straw campaign donations, witness tampering, and acting as an unregistered foreign agent for China, appears to be breaking new legal ground by calling for a new trial by claiming his defense attorneys allegedly relied on artificial intelligence to compile their final argument for the jury. Yeah, I'd be pissed too. In a withering motion filed Monday night with a judge in Washington, Michel's new attorney argued that his Los Angeles-based lawyer David Kenner relied on the fledgling technology at critical points in Michel's trial, contributing to prejudicial ineffective assistance of counsel. Kerner used an experimental artificial intelligence program, and they have here in parenthetical AI. I think they might have used it a couple of times already before. Why didn't they just start using the AI before then? But I guess there's, different strokes, different folks. Started using the program to draft the closing argument, ignoring the best arguments and conflating the charged schemes. And he then publicly boasted that the AI program turned hours or days of legal work into seconds. I think they got you, my guy. Michel's new defense team from DC-based Arndt Fox Schiff wrote, "It is now apparent that Kenner and his co-counsel appear to have had an undisclosed financial stake in the AI program, and they experimented with it during Michel's trial so they could issue a press release afterwards promoting the program. A clear conflict of interest." Yeah, you're saying I'm not an attorney. I can figure that one out. Michel's prior publicist, this is the quote, also informed members of the current defense team that Kenner proudly stated at the end of the trial words to the effect of, "AI wrote our closing." Former federal prosecutor Peter Zeidenberg wrote in a declaration accompanying the motion. Oh, Lord. Are you going to experiment? You going to experiment on Praz's trial? Come on, I took that personal. Zeidenberg pointed to a press release a firm called iLevel appears to have issued in May, which included a photo of Michel and boasted that the company's technology made history last week, becoming the first use of generated AI in a federal trial. The release quotes Kenner calling the AI tool an absolute game changer for complex litigation. My dude, no prior consent or nothing. The announcement does not mention that after a 3-week trial featuring a diverse set of witnesses ranging from Hollywood star Leonardo DiCaprio to former Attorney General Jeff Sessions, what kind of 7 degrees of separation? So this is Praz and Leonardo DiCaprio and Jeff Sessions walk into a bar. Jurors took less than 3 days to convict Michel. I'll say on all 10 felony charges he faced. That people be trying to get ChatGPT to do their homework, but they don't even edit it afterwards. At least do the edit part. Kenner and another defense attorney in the case, Alon Azraeli, did not immediately respond to messages late Monday night seeking comment on the claims in the new filing. Federal prosecutors claim Michel took staggering sums of money, about $88 million, from wealthy Malaysian businessman Joe Low, in a bid to enhance his influence in the U.S. and later to derail the investigation and prosecution of Low on fraud charges stemming from the collapse of Malaysian Sovereign Wealth Fund 1MBD. What? This is was this a RICO case? Wow, there's so many tentacles. The hip-hop star who came to prominence in the 1990s was accused of arranging to donate money from foreign nationals to President Barack Obama's re-election campaign in 2012 and making intensive efforts to influence President Trump's administration to drop or resolve the charges against Low. Yo, Michel has been, but Praz, my guy, this is the whole dark money stuff that people be talking about. Michel has been free. But hold on, wait. So y'all just gonna skip by? I thought they were gonna. I need to look at. they didn't explain what this wealth fund, this Malaysian Sovereign Wealth Fund, 1MBD. I'm almost done with the article. Okay, hold on. Let me figure it out because I'm confused. Even somebody else out there might be confused. Okay, Wikipedia to the rescue. The One Malaysia Development Berhad scandal, often referred to as the 1MDB scandal or just 1MDB, is a corruption, bribery, and money laundering conspiracy in which the Malaysian Sovereign Wealth Fund, One Malaysia Development Berhad, was systematically embezzled, with assets diverted globally by the perpetrators of the scheme. Although it began in Malaysia, the scandal's global scope implicated institutions and individuals in politics, banking, and entertainment, and led to criminal investigations in a number of nations. The 1MDB scandal has been described as one of the world's greatest financial scandals and declared by the United States Department of Justice as the largest kleptocracy case to date in 2016. Praz, what did you get yourself tied into? What? You got to realize the Fugees are iconic in the Haitian community and to hip hop fans. This Miseducation of Lauryn Hill album, who Lauryn Hill was a member of the Fugees, is she's celebrating her 25th year anniversary of that album release. And after, like, the Fugees are a beloved commodity in the hip hop space. Praz, no. Okay, so dang, and out of all these these billionaires in this thing, of course they're gonna sweep the little guy. Praz is not. Well, I don't know what he's been doing these past couple of decades. Who knows? He might be a billionaire now himself too. But he's been low key. I haven't really heard any noise from the Praz contingent. But to wrap up this the rest of this article, I know I'm going long, David, but you can probably do some of your editing magic, or maybe suggesting a part 1 and part 2 to the conclusion of prosecuting Praz. Michelle has been free on bond since the first charges were filed in the case in 2019. U.S. District Court Judge Colleen Kohler-Cotelli, who oversaw the trial, allowed him to remain free pending sentencing. That hasn't yet been scheduled, partly due to a court order freezing his assets. Michelle has in dire financial straits before. He has been in dire financial straits before and during the trial. He sold the rights to his past recordings and almost sought to raise $2.6 million for his defense by pledging part of his frozen assets or his future earnings. Reuters reported that back in March. I always have trouble reading that word, Reuters. Michelle is set to kick off a Fugees reunion. See he's set to kick off a Fugees reunion tour Tuesday night, linked to Tuesday night. When was that? Maybe it was yesterday. I'm reading this. Okay, maybe it's tonight. I don't know. Linked to the 25th anniversary of Lauryn Hill's solo album. Lauryn, run the other way. No longer affiliate yourself, man. These tentacles are sticky. The announced schedule beginning Tuesday night in Newark, New Jersey, and passing through Washington on Saturday. Man, maybe I should go check him out one last time while he's free, right? Features more than 20 concerts, including 2 in Canada. It's unclear whether Michelle plans to attend all of the gigs. Beyond the claims related to AI, the motion also makes a slew of other arguments criticizing Kenner's handling of the case. Michelle's new attorney argued that Kenner had a conflict of interest due to potential contempt of court, citing over claims the defense leaked stamped grand jury exhibits to a Bloomberg reporter just prior to the start of the trial. The new lawyers also say Kenner was deficient by failing to seek separate trials for Michelle on the straw donation charges related to the Obama campaign and the foreign influence related charges from the Trump era. That decision may have been influenced by a flat fee Kenner agreed to with Michelle, the new trial motion says. Michelle's counsel was deficient throughout, likely more focused on promoting his AI program and saving himself from the contempt proceeding than zealously defending Michelle. That was a quote from Zeidenberg. And that was brought to us by the writer Josh Gerstein. And that was written on the 16th of October. So things may have changed by the time you're hearing this. And that's my segment. Thanks for giving me a microphone for a little bit, David. And back to you.
All right. Well, yeah, there's a surprising turn of events, don't you think? So I don't know if anything has changed since recording this, although I like how you at some point loses track of what day it is. When's Tuesday? Is it today? Where am I? It happens to me all the time. But yeah, I guess was that earlier last week that must have happened. So I don't know. I haven't seen any more news about it, but what a tangled web that is. First of all, the weird number of things that Pross got himself involved in, and then his attorney's decision not to separate the issues. I don't know if it's necessarily up to them. The judge and prosecutors might not have been receptive to splitting them into two different trials, but he was charged with two different sort of sets of circumstances. One being, what was it again? There was something. Oh, right, the straw donations scheme during the Obama administration, and then during the Trump administration, the lobbying to try to get Joe Low off the hook. But they are kind of related, because I think it was Joe Low's stolen money, or money that he had stolen, whether it was his that he stole or somebody else's that he stole or whatever. But trying to launder that money into donations to the Obama campaign, and then later, when Joe Low was caught doing these things, both the straw donations and the embezzlement itself, the Trump administration was responsible for the pursuit of Low for that embezzlement, which was laundered into, presumably into straw donations, and they wanted to try him for that, and he was involved in that as well. So, I mean, there's a pretty strong relationship between the two sets of events. So it's not necessarily the case that the lawyer was deficient in not getting those cases separated. He might have been a really good lawyer and still not had the cases separated. But apparently he wasn't doing a particularly good job, because he was more interested in promoting his AI app program. God only knows what you would have to call this thing anyway, which I guess he was going to try to market to lawyers, and Darwin correctly, breaks out laughing at the idea that, look, it might not be a worthwhile pursuit here, something that could turn weeks or months or whatever of legal work into seconds. Probably isn't quality legal work, although, computers are powerful, but not that powerful. But I guess basically the lawyer had his eye on the ball of possibly making big bucks marketing a legal AI program that would allow lawyers to have briefs and filings written for them. And he's not the only one out there doing it either. It's just amazing that this would be done on a high profile case. Like this case is going to be scrutinized. And this wouldn't be the place to experiment with AI. Although, even in lower profile trials, it's not a good idea to experiment with AI with people, because there's a number of things that I've seen in the news in passing where lawyers, lots of people who it's inappropriate to use AI, but lawyers writing briefs using AI and not really checking the work. They're like, it looks good. It looks like briefs normally look. It's got citations and everything. And as it turns out, either they were misciting the cases, because, this is nuanced stuff. Even, human brains don't always grasp this nuance, let alone computer brains, but they probably figured computer brains were smarter than human brains. Not necessarily for these cases, but also, as it turns out, the AI programs were often smart enough to know that you needed to have citations. You can't simply assert things. You got to have citations for them. So it got citations for them. What AI doesn't know is that the citations have to be real. You can't just format words into what looks like a citation and throw name, we need a name here. Johnson versus U.S. Oh, and then you need some numbers, and then the initials U.S., and then some more numbers, and then a date. So we'll make them up. But they weren't real cases. Like, you can't just do that. So it turns out AI, at the moment, still poorly suited to something like legal proceedings. But that's sort of a separate story. So now he's claiming ineffective representation of counsel, and he may be right, because his counsel was, one, distracted in trying to launch a new business, AI for lawyers. Two, used this AI, which was unproven and apparently not particularly good, to write his arguments, and apparently it did a bad job of it. So, okay. So anyway, so now there's, not only is he fighting the charges, but, still fighting the charges, but also saying, I didn't even have good representation in fighting it the first time. So that's why it's back in the news, and, well, rather amazing. So, and difficult to follow. And it's all wrapped up in hip-hop fandom as well, too. So, all right, well, that'll pose a conundrum. Anyway, time for us to get ready for our third break, and then big decision time about whether or not to spend the third or fourth, whatever number of segments it is we have. Is it Tuesday? I don't know. The last segment of the show on more about Mike Johnson and the nuance there that AI won't be able to give you, but we as humans can share amongst ourselves, or other more esoteric stories. We need a weekend edition of Kagro in the morning, except I need rest and sleep, so I kind of hope that never happens, even though the rest of you might want it. Hi everybody, it's me, David Waldman. Yes, the same guy who interrupts you all the time. Interrupting you one more time, just to tell you again, another reminder that your contributions are what keep this show on the air, and patreon.com, patreon.com, is still among the easiest ways to make the sustaining subscription donations that keep us afloat. Are you ready for the pep talk about how our Patreon campaign is still going strong and growing? Well, too bad. Yeah, the plain fact is we actually are headed in the wrong direction, and whereas we once had about 175 monthly patrons, we're now actually down below 150. Time to recruit some more. Not exactly the kind of news I wanted to share, but there it is. For those of you in a position to support the show, patreon.com does make it easy to make those secure, recurring monthly contributions to do so. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. We've been through a lot together. The worst of the pandemic, we hope. The worst of the insurrection, we hope. So go ahead and treat yourself. You don't need an excuse. Give yourself the gift of a little something you enjoy in life. Support the show. And of course, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running on those options too. So thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We couldn't, or at least shouldn't, do it without you. Hope you'll be on board soon too. Thanks for all your support. Okay, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Last chance before the weekend. Here's some connective tissue for you. Okay, I have, I guess it's one of the last times I'm even going to bother checking, maybe, over on Twitter. As almost everybody who used to feed me information via the KITM hashtag has migrated by now over to Blue Sky, Mastodon, elsewhere. But I've got one more, and maybe there are still a few of you out there. And, oh, by the way, the offer still stands to the extent that I have Blue Sky invitations available. I'm happy to share them with you, but I'm going to do it one-to-one. I'm not going to, apparently people have been circulating the codes and saying, oh, just come on over if you want to. And then that's how the trolls are getting a hold of them. But they'll eventually get a hold of them anyway. Doesn't matter. But anyway, if you're still interested in moving over to Blue Sky and you haven't been able to, lots of people have codes to share. I'm not getting them hand over the fist or anything. They were coming one at a time at the rate of about one a week at this point. But hop in line and I'll fix you up, or ask around if there are other people who need them, or if I've run out of them. Anyway, Patrick Snyder is among those who have made his way over there, but one of the last messages that he used Twitter to send our way on the KITM hashtag was this somewhat related to some other stuff we've been talking about story. It is a weird, true DC story thread from Ian Larson. Who are we talking about? Global Strategy and Comms on International Relations and International Development, National Security. Okay. All right. Now at the World Bank. So Used to be a staffer on Capitol Hill, as he explains this weird thread. But before I go, after I go. How about that? Patrick Snyder sends us Ian's thread, and it says, Weird True DC Story Thread. This was back on October 24th. I began my career working for a member of Congress, and I still have an account with the Congressional Credit Union. Okay. I needed to go to one of their branches yesterday afternoon, so I drove up to the Hill, walked into their offices, and noticed two people sitting in the waiting area. One was telling another that he wants that person to be cast in an upcoming Kevin Smith movie. Okay. Odd topic of conversation. Weird topic, as he says, for DC. So I looked to see who was speaking. It was George Santos. Yeah, sure. He was just lounging around the credit union in the middle of the day as though he had nothing better to do. If he walks back to his office, he'll be ambushed by reporters. So he's sitting on a couch in the Congressional Credit Union. It's the Wright-Patman Congressional Federal Credit Union or something like that. Anyway, they got a couch, and he just figured, I'll just occupy this. The reporters don't know to come looking for me in there. They do now, if they're listening to the most important podcast in the world. And apparently, he moonlights as Kevin Smith's casting agent, I guess, says Ian. Well, anyway, he was still there when I left, just milling about and chatting with the tellers. You'd think he'd be meeting with his lawyers, but that's where he was at 2:00 on a Monday afternoon. There's photos to prove it. So there you go. That is a weird story, to say the least. It's about George Santos. We've been speaking about him before. And I have more news for you on Patrick Snyder. Patrick Snyder not only has moved over to Blue Sky, as Darwin has as well, and I'm glad that they both have done it, but Patrick's on my relatively short list of two people who have recently established their Patreon accounts, have been making contributions via Patreon. Patrick Snyder, I believe, has been a contributor to the show before, but, his name came up in email because he established or reestablished a Patreon, regular payment via Patreon, and we wanted to thank him for that. Back on the 16th of the month is when I got that notice, and just prior to that, on the 11th, Mary Hill. Thank you to Mary and Patrick for joining our little Patreon family, which we want to become a gigantic Patreon family. One, so that we can meet the obligations of the college education for college boy number 2. Secondly, so that we can justify our existence in general and pay for all the things that you need to pay for, and not decide that you'd be making more money as a Walmart greeter. And 3, so that we can give a slightly larger pittance to our friend Scott Anderson, who helps me with the most headache-inducing aspect of producing post-production of this show, the daily summary of all of our links, so that you can go and check up on things, read for yourself, decide to record your own segment rebutting what we have offered, whatever it may be. But it's important that everybody get the links, or that the links be made available. That's all, just so that we can establish our credentials as relatively truthy people here in this podcasting game. Okay, so now the decision time, what to spend our last couple of minutes on. There's more information about Mike Johnson. Might as well get it all out there. Who knows what's going to develop over the weekend? You need to be armed with as much information about him as possible. So lengthy explanation of my position on his interpretation of the Constitution yesterday. And that's kind of the bent of some of these things I have to share with you. But then there's one extra bit of information that I wanted to share. And so there's a bit of a mess in pocket. Let me open everything up and make sure I've got everything. All right, that's the one I wanted to make sure we get to eventually. But I grabbed this from the Washington Post that I thought was of some additional interest in its approach to this question. It's Philip Bump asking in the headline, does Mike Johnson get too much credit for the effort to overturn 2020? Of course, Mike Johnson will remind you, I wasn't trying to overturn anything, but that's a disingenuous interpretation of things. This is what Philip has to say about it. Soon after, the House Republican Conference voted to make Representative Mike Johnson the party's nominee for Speaker, and some 12 hours before he would win that position on the House floor, a reporter asked Johnson about his efforts to subvert the 2020 election results. Johnson shook his head. His colleagues enthusiastically booed the questioner. But this question of Johnson's efforts to block Joe Biden's 2021 inauguration quickly became a central part of discussions about his political career. In part, this was a function of Johnson's remarkably short Hill resume. There weren't that many things to talk about. But in part, it's because there were obvious moments at which Johnson had been an unusually vocal voice, or I've added things, I've screwed it up, had been unusually vocal in bolstering Trump's push to retain power. This attention on Johnson's role in that push, though, risks overstating his importance, centering on one person, a sweeping, pervasive set of arguments and tactics that Johnson may have simply advocated rather than initiated. Maybe. By making Johnson the poster child for efforts to overturn the 2020 election, we run the risk of minimizing that pervasiveness and the important roles played by other people. But yeah, just generally, like, it's not all his fault. There are hundreds of equally insurrection-minded members of Congress, and that's a gigantic problem. That's true. And also, of course, he was involved in plenty of other things and has dabbled in all sorts of other kooky conspiracy theories, but done it with glasses and a suit on, and then backed off of them when they got too kooky. But he is responsible for, embedding them in the Republican collective mind, and then backs away and says, "Oh, see, I'm reasonable. I don't still believe it. I was just asking questions then." But Philip Bump's point really here is that, he's one of many people who do this. And to say he was the mastermind, like, if you purge him somehow from government, you're not going to be rid of the problem. So Politico and NBC News presented reports this week walking through Johnson's role in the effort. They offer a useful timeline of Johnson's actions and a useful mechanism for affixing his actions in the broader universe of election denialism, which means I'm going to get tagged again on YouTube. Oh, yeah, right. So here's the next section, which will tell you what kinds of crazy conspiracy theories has he dabbled in. The next section title is Dominion Voting Systems. Yeah, he's as kooky as Sidney Powell. Johnson had embraced the idea that there was significant fraud from the outset. On November 10th, 2020, 3 days after the election was called for Biden, a radio host named Moon Griffin, really? All right, published an interview with Johnson in which the pair discussed the idea that illegal votes were cast. Now, later on, he says, I was only talking about those votes being, when I spoke about illegal votes, I meant the ones that were from states which had, in my view, illegally and unconstitutionally changed their voting procedure and thus rendered their votes illegal. I wasn't talking about Dominion voting system registering illegal votes or registering them improperly. But you used to be advocating for that. And then I guess for some reason you dropped that because it was so stupid and kooky, but you started it, or you helped get it started. Asked to respond to an allegation about the Georgia results. I only challenged Arizona and Pennsylvania, and for different reasons. Well, why make the allegation about Georgia? Asked to respond to that allegation about Georgia results from the conspiracy theory website Gateway Pundit. Yes, he'll answer Gateway Pundit's questions. He's that kind of kook. For example, Johnson said that there was, quote, a lot of what we believe to be credible allegations of fraud and irregularity there. He doesn't say that now. He predicted that they would, quote, uncover a lot of things that would raise a lot of eyebrows. They haven't. However, they have raised eyebrows by charging Donald Trump with lots of things in Georgia, as it turns out. A week later, Johnson was interviewed by another pair of radio hosts, at which point he embraced the idea that voting machines made by Dominion voting systems were dubious. Those machines, he said, used, quote, a software system that is used all around the country that is suspect because it came from Hugo Chavez's Venezuela. He actually invoked the name. Dead for 13 years, but invoked the name. You want to know what will change minds about where he is and what kind of person he is, Dominion should be suing Mike Johnson. He was too small a fish at the time, probably, to include him in the lawsuits. Sidney Powell was actually more famous and better known than he was, but now he's Speaker of the House. Dominion Voting Systems should file suit. And the other one, too, Smartmatic. I don't know if you ever mentioned their name, but Dominion, why not use some of the $1 billion that's coming your way to sue Mike Johnson? Go ahead. You want headlines? Sue the Speaker of the House. This idea would be elevated nationally when Trump attorney Sidney Powell made an expanded version of the allegation during a news conference hosted by the Republican National Committee. He should sue the RNC as well, on November 19th, 2020. But it was already out in the ether, thanks to people like Johnson. Within days of the election being called for Biden, there was rampant discussion on social media of an alleged and non-existent connection between Dominion and Venezuela. Oh, that definitely deserves the cuckoo sound effect. Well, this idea that Dominion was suspect was also rumbling around in top-level right-wing media circles at the time. On November 7th, 2020, Fox Business and Fox News host Maria Bartiromo documented a conversation she'd apparently had with Powell in which the Trump lawyer elevated allegations about Dominion. Herein embedded is an Eric Trump tweet about this. This software has lost all credibility. We need a full manual recount. And linking to Chanel Rion from OAN, right? Making this whole thing. I don't know if she makes any mention of what's his face in there, Johnson, but it's all the crazy spittle-flecked screaming of the Dominion voting systems that, quote, glitched in favor of Joe Biden and was used in 29 states, partnered up with the Clinton Global Initiative and had on staff former employees of both Clinton Growth Initiative and Clinton Cash. All right. You get the idea of what she's screaming about. Johnson's willingness to embrace baseless allegations of fraud or claims about the voting machines is indicative of his eagerness to support Trump's position. It may also, given how often he described speaking to Trump in that interview with Griffin, be an echo of rhetoric he heard from Trump or Trump's team. There's no reason to think, though, that Johnson was a central driver of this argument. And it's, again, not to let him off the hook here. Oh, he didn't really believe it, or he wasn't really important in all this. He was, and he did, but he wasn't the only one. And even if you get rid of him, there's hundreds of others that are guilty of the same infraction. But what about the Texas lawsuit? On December 7th, 2020, Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton filed a federal lawsuit aimed at blocking the electors submitted by a number of states, not just Arizona and Pennsylvania, that backed Biden over Trump. Paxton's filing argued that those states, quote, violated the electors clause, or in the alternative, the 14th Amendment, by taking or allowing non-legislative actions to change the election rules that would govern the appointment of presidential electors, even though that's not actually what they did, and that's not a problem. In other words, despite the Constitution stating that state legislatures could determine the means of choosing electors to the Electoral College, some states had election bureaus of secretaries of state that made it easier to cast a remote ballot during the coronavirus pandemic. And this, Paxton argued, was a usurpation of the legislature's power, though it is not. It was in fact delegated and not even necessarily connected if you separate the stages of appointment of the electors from the methodology you use to inform that appointment. But we did that yesterday. A number of other lawsuits filed at the state level had made related arguments that, for example, changes to the process for voting in 2020 were violations of state constitutions. And herein embedded is a tweet from the account now identified as Speaker Mike Johnson, but he wasn't one then, saying, today I made arrangements to file an amicus brief in the Texas case now pending at the Supreme Court on behalf of House Republicans who are all deeply concerned about the integrity of our election system. And remember, we're only challenging Arizona and Pennsylvania. Here's the headline. Texas sues Georgia, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin at the Supreme Court over elections rules. This is the case for which Johnson filed the amicus brief. Keep that in mind for just a second, the amicus brief. Actually, more than just a second. Johnson seized on the opportunity. He quickly mobilized his colleagues to sign an amicus brief, a document indicating outside support for the lawsuit. More than 120 House Republicans signed it, but it bears Johnson's name, and his signature is the first to appear. He later described the effort to the New Yorker's Isaac Chotiner. We read that yesterday, where he said, "The key point is that so much of it was done by other kinds of officials, governors, secretaries of state, judges, and not the legislatures themselves," Johnson insisted. "The framers were very careful about making that safeguard in the Constitution." Yet they made a different safeguard, though. That's the problem. And when you deviate from that, which you haven't, it opens a Pandora's box to this kind of chaos. Well, Bump says, this framing of the question as being about the constitutional power of legislatures in presidential elections, he insisted, was the question that, quote, hangs over the election cycle this year. And noting that he says, that Chotiner says, it didn't come up in the debates, but it was the underlying issue. Chotiner replied, and Phillips says, pretty clearly being sarcastic. And Johnson agreed, though, it was the underlying issue. Well, he thought so. It just wasn't. The Supreme Court didn't buy Paxton's argument. The suit was DOA. Later reporting suggested that Paxton had picked up a document and argument that originated with Trump's own legal team. They seeded Paxton. Here, go file this suit for us so that we can point to it and say there's litigation pending. And it's not our litigation, but they eventually filed their own. Trump attorney John Eastman, ever heard of him, would later make a similar argument, the centerpiece of his memo advocating the flat rejection of electors on January 6th. 2021. Johnson's organizing effort was successful. His legal effort, tangential to the case, even if the lawsuit had been taken up by the court, was not. And now on to January 6th. Politico's review of Johnson's efforts on Trump's behalf, get it, begins with a January 5th, 2021 meeting of members of the House. There, Johnson offered his constitutional argument and managed to corral 36 colleagues into signing a statement framing their objections to Biden electors in that way. This prompted the New York Times to describe Johnson as, quote, the most important architect of the Electoral College objections. Perhaps, but he was by no means the only architect. More than a month before the January 5th, 2021 meeting, Representative Mo Brooks, remember him, the amicus brief Mo Brooks. Keep in mind, more than a month before January 5th meeting, Mo Brooks had announced his intent to object to Biden electors on January 6th. The Pennsylvania Republican Party began advocating a similar strategy soon afterward, though not the Pennsylvania state legislature, importantly enough. Pennsylvania's electors would be one of two states that were the focus of Republican objections, eventually on January 6th. By December 10th, 2020, the Washington Post reported that Trump's allies were pressuring legislators to offer objections. Johnson is mentioned in the article for his simultaneous push to get signatories on his amicus brief. We should still try to figure out exactly what took place here, said Jim Jordan, telling CNN in an article published on December 7th, 2020. And as I said, that includes, I think, debates on the House floor potentially on January 6th. By the end of December, it was already clear that a number of representatives would object to the electors submitted on January 6th. The question turned to the other side of Capitol Hill. Without a senator joining the objection, the effort to derail electors would fail. Then Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell struggled to ensure that no one did, but on December 30th, Josh Hawley released a statement announcing that he would object to the electors from Pennsylvania. One reason? Because the state had changed its rules for voting. They'd done so before the pandemic and done so through the Republican-led legislature. So remember, these changes are unconstitutional because they weren't done by the legislature. Oh, they were done by the legislature? Oh, well, let's do it anyway. In the end, well over 100 Republicans objected to the electors from Arizona, Pennsylvania, or both. Those aligning with Johnson's effort represented a relatively modest minority of the total. The Times reported that about 3/4 who had done so, relied on Johnson's arguments in defending their opposition. But those arguments were also Paxton's, and it seems likely that the arguments, even Paxton's arguments, were the rationalization for their votes to object rather than the reason for those votes. And as Philip mentions earlier in his article, even Paxton's arguments may have been lifted from the Trump team. None of this is to say that Johnson wasn't a fervent actor in the post-2020 moment, or that he wasn't closely aligned or working in concert with Trump and his team. It certainly isn't to suggest that having someone second in line to the presidency who's willing to embrace baseless claims, or worse, to throw out valid votes in a technicality, doesn't raise problematic questions. It is instead to say that Johnson was not a linchpin of the effort to block the will of the voters in the 2020 election. He is in a position of power and prominence now, but back then he was simply part of a wide-ranging and ceaseless effort involving a huge number of people, or huge, as Trump might say, many of whom presented more danger to democracy than the new Speaker of the House. Okay, fair point. Now, I asked you to keep names and issues in mind. The amicus brief and Mo Brooks. Here is something actually that may have come up from one of the links in Philip's piece here, but it's important to call it out separately. This, a link to WAFF.com, a Huntsville, Alabama, it looks like, television station, reporting back on June 23rd, 2022, as more information about January 6th came to light thanks to the committee's work, etc. Email, says the headline, email shows Representative Brooks, Mo Brooks, remember this one, requested a pardon from former President Trump. But do you remember all the twists and turns in that request? In a recently released email, United States Representative Mo Brooks, who I also believe was on hand to save Steve Scalise when he was shot, just to tie it back to yet another story, isn't it? Wasn't it Mo Brooks? In a recently released email, Mo Brooks asked former President Donald Trump, while he was still president, to pardon him and who else? A whole bunch of Republicans. But specifically, which Republicans? To pardon him and, quote, every Republican who signed the amicus brief in the Texas lawsuit against other states. He asked this of him on January 11th, 2021. Brooks sent an email from the address mobrooksal5@gmail.com. And he sent it to Molly Michael, who, as I recall, if I'm recalling correctly, wasn't she the person on hand who witnessed Trump, what was it, waving around the memo from General Milley saying, look, here's him saying we should be attacking Iran. It wasn't me, it was him, etc. And I can't show it to you because it's classified and now we have a problem. That Molly Michael, right? I think so. Anyway, he sends this email. Dear Molly, President Trump asked me to send you this letter. Whoops. This letter is also pursuant to a request from Matt Gaetz. Yeah. So, okay, Matt Gaetz asked me to send a letter to President Trump, and President Trump asked me to tell you, Molly, what we need. It is clear that a deep-pocketed and vitriolic socialist Democrats, parentheses, with perhaps some liberal Republican help, end parens, are going to abuse America's judicial system by targeting numerous Republicans with sham charges deriving from our recent fight for honest and accurate elections and speeches related thereto. As such, I recommend that the president give general, parentheses, all-purpose, pardons to the following groups of people. Every Republican who signed the amicus brief in the Texas lawsuit against other states deriving from their violation, allegedly I would say, wrong, Article 1, Section 4. Oh, interesting. He either chooses a different section or misnames, and perhaps other provisions of the U.S. Constitution. Every congressman and senator who voted to reject the Electoral College vote submission of Arizona and Pennsylvania should also be included. American simply cannot permit socialist Democrats to abuse freedom of speech, all capitalized, of course, freedom of association, United States Constitution, and various federal statutes via their often used strategy of abusing the judicial process via private organizations they fund or the prosecutorial arm they will soon control. Thank you for your consideration. Mo Brooks. And he released a statement afterwards, I guess, justifying all of that. But what else do you need to know besides that? But the reason I bring this up, who has advised him to seek a pardon? Matt Gaetz. That's dumb to begin with, but that's what he says. Matt Gaetz is urging Mo Brooks is looking for a pardon. Who does he want pardoned? Everybody who signed the amicus brief. That's Mike Johnson's amicus brief. That whole thing that makes him, maybe, allegedly, although Philip Bump disagrees, a central player in the coup effort and in the insurrection and the effort to overturn the election, all of which he denies, etc., Mike Johnson. In other words, if you signed Mike Johnson's totally reasonable, totally academic, and totally, nothing to do whatsoever with the January 6th riot amicus brief, you, in Matt Gaetz's view, and he's an idiot, and in Mo Brooks's view, and he's an idiot too, but all of them will require a presidential pardon for them not to face some sort of criminal charges at some point stemming from their agreeing to sign on to this thing. Now, he may be totally wrong. They don't need any kind of presidential pardon, whatever. But it's interesting that at the time, they thought they did. Now, they were convinced by Mr. Reasonable, Mike Johnson, to sign this amicus brief. I wonder if at any point he said to them, now, I just have to warn you, I feel it's only fair to warn you, you might need a presidential pardon if this doesn't work. I don't think so. I think he would disagree with that there was anything illegal about it. But it's interesting that the other people who could have been more central to things, according to, Philip Bump, I guess, and others might argue. I don't know whether he would consider Mo Brooks any more central, or Matt Gaetz, for that matter. But it's interesting that at the time, the people driving the process were like, by the way, we might need presidential pardons for all of this stuff. So keep that in mind, too. Plus, Dominion should probably be suing Mike Johnson for helping to help the accusations against them take root. By the way, what is the thing that Mo Brooks was referring to? I'm just sort of wondering about. So what was he saying? Article 2, section... Did he say Section 4? What is that even? The vice president... Oh, no, that's about impeachment. I wonder why he... maybe he thought... who knows what. Anyway, time for us to sign off for the weekend. We'll be back on Monday.
Radio.com.
But Justice Putnam will carry you over for the next hour, of course.
Kagro in the morning with David Waldman.
And here's what he's got on tap. The voting record and extreme policy positions of the new House Speaker, MAGA Mike Johnson, deserve a closer look. There's much more to it, so I'm glad he'll be taking a look as well. And then, of course, it's time to round up the hottest news and the most esoteric and weird and outstanding and unusual news from around the country and around the world. That all comes next. See you next week.